Thank you so much for joining us for the second film in our 2021 UConn Human Rights Film Plus series. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land that which we typically gather is in the territory of the Mohegan, Menchucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Scottokie, Golden Hill Pacasset, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. The UConn Human Rights Film Plus series presents new and classic works of documentary, feature, and journalistic film, as well as video games and other digital media that address key human rights issues and themes. I'm Heather Elliott Familaro, the Department Head for Digital Media and Design at the University of Connecticut. In 2019, we began offering a Bachelor of Fine Arts major in digital film video production, and we've been working very closely with the Human Rights Institute and the DOD Human Rights Impact on a new human rights film and digital media initiative. To kick it off this year, the Human Rights Film Plus series is featuring newly hired faculty in the Digital Media and Design Department who address human rights issues through film, animation, and game design. And we invite you to come back in March and April for the remainder of these series, featuring 4 events with Digital Media and Design faculty. On March 2nd, Hidden, an animated short film by Hee-Ju Kim. March 16th, The Limits of My World, a documentary film by Heather Casano. April 6th, Black Haven, a narrative video game by James Coltrane. And April 20th, Missing Damascus, a narrative short film by Tanju Ozdemir. Tonight's event is the second of the 2021 series, and we are featuring the powerful documentary film produced, written, and directed by Ramona S. Diaz, 1,000 Cuts. Nowhere in the worldwide erosion of democracy fueled by social media disinformation campaigns more starkly evident than in the authoritarian regime of Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte. With press freedom under threat in the Philippines, 1,000 Cuts goes inside the escalating war between the government and the press. The documentary follows Maria Ressa, a renowned journalist and our special guest tonight, who has become a top target of President Duterte's crackdown on the news media. Maria Ressa places the tools of the free press and her own freedom on the line in defense of truth and democracy. This multi-award-winning film is available to stream online via Frontline. I hope you've all in the audience had an opportunity to watch it before tonight, but if you didn't, we'll put the link in the chat box so you can see that. And let's go ahead and watch that trailer right now.
Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. Maria Ressa carries the torch of press freedom in a country held in thrall by a populist president. It started with the drug war.
Do not do drugs, because I will kill you.
President Duterte began his administration with the drug list.
This is the drug industry of the Philippines.
He showed everyone a list. People on that list started dying.
I'm telling the Filipino people it's gonna be bloody.
We demanded the government be held accountable. Duterte was annoyed by our reporting.
You are a fake news outlet. They will be allowed to criticize us, but you go to jail for your crime.
We started getting attacked on social media. The government created disinformation networks, so people have no idea what the truth is. I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour. We don't even know whether we can trust the police to protect us.
Because you're a journalist, so you're exempted from assassination.
We didn't even realize how dangerous it is for you.
Why are you crying?
Because I'm scared for you.
Maria Ressa has been arrested. The charges against Ressa were aimed at intimidating those who challenged Duterte's rule.
So why should you care about what happens in the Philippines? They test the tactics of how to manipulate America in our country. If it works, they port it over to the rest of the world.
Maria Ressa was one of 4 journalists named as Time Magazine's Person of the Year.
Maria won't be afraid. I'm afraid for her.
What we're seeing is death by 1,000 cuts. Little cuts of Philippine democracy. We will not duck. We will not hide. We will hold the line.
Wonderful. Thank you, Heather. My name is Glenn Matoma. I'm Director of DOD Human Rights Impact here at the University of Connecticut. And I'm really excited, really honored, really pleased to be the moderator for this discussion for you all tonight. It's a tremendous pleasure to welcome the panelists, Maria Ressa, Ramona Diaz, and our own Richard Wilson to this conversation tonight. They all have distinguished, fabulous biographies, and I'm not going to talk about any of that because we're going to put that straight in the chat so that you can link to it and browse those at your leisure. But we don't want to waste any time before getting into this conversation. We were just speaking ahead of time. We've actually been trying to have this screening for about 2 months, finding a slot to make it happen. And every time we schedule it, we think, now is the moment where it's so relevant, so important to have this conversation. Oh no, now's the moment that we really need to have this conversation. And here we are at the beginning of February, and I have to say, now is the moment that we have to have this conversation. So tonight, we're really excited to open up this story, which is really a powerful story about what's been going on in the Philippines, but clearly also a story about what's going on in our world. The stakes couldn't be higher. Truth, democracy, human rights, and our collective ability, right, to address the fundamental challenge of populist, violent authoritarianism. So I'm hoping I'll be asking a few questions of my own to get us started. I'm hoping that the panelists will engage each other, but then we'd like to engage you as well. Throughout the conversation, if you have questions that are coming to mind that you'd like us to address, do use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom panel, the two little dialogue boxes, right? You just click on there and you add your question to it. About 2/3 of the way through, we'll start answering those. We'll get to as many as we can. And then those we can't, we'll also try and answer just by typing in if we can. But don't wait. If things come to mind, don't hesitate. Don't let it slip out. So go ahead and stick it in the Q&A. We'll save those and we'll try and get to those as quickly as we can. But without further ado, I'd really like to get to this conversation. And Maria, of course, I think we'd like to start with you. I know many of us watched this film. It's incredible. It leaves us hanging in June of 2020. We can tell that you have been targeted by the Duterte regime with a whole slew of charges, but I understand just recently another batch has come through, and even yesterday you were dealing with the legal fallout. I'm wondering if you can give us an update on your case now. What's the situation like, and how are you doing?
Thanks, Glenn. I mean, it's funny to watch the trailer. Like you just said, this is the moment. This is the moment. So I don't know. There's that quote from T.S. Eliot about tradition and the individual talent, of how you read a novel today is affected by all of the novels that you've read, and all the novels you've read affects how you read the novel today. Like, so watching that trailer again, it's like, yeah, it hits me at different times, because the present moment of the past is always there and it will determine the future. Anyway, sorry. I will answer your question. I guess since the film, it ended, there's a post note when I was convicted, June 15th, 2020, convicted for a story we published 8 years earlier when the law we allegedly violated didn't exist. And for a story I didn't write, edit, or supervise. So let's start there, right? And then since then, I've had, November 27th, I received a 9th arrest warrant. And, when you get an arrest warrant, you kind of like, no one tells you. They'll just show up if you don't have your own feelers for where your arrest warrants are coming from. So I had my 9th. I was in the middle of a board meeting. I ran out to just make it to post bail. So that happened November 27th. And then again, January, the week of January 14th, I received a 10th arrest warrant. I posted bail. So that means a total of 10 criminal cases in less than 2 years. And in my life, I am fighting those criminal cases. The end goal is really, it's a war of attrition. So I spend a lot of time both learning about the strengths and weaknesses of law, and then in the context of a greater consolidation of power. Since the film, ABS-CBN, the largest broadcaster, a news group I came home to head in 2005, that's been shut down on the airwaves. They've lost their franchise. An anti-terror law was passed along with, when Hong Kong passed their security law, the Philippines passed an anti-terror law where anyone deemed a terrorist can be arrested without a warrant and held for up to 24 days. So yeah, it's dark, but you got to look for the patches of light.
Indeed, yes. Frankly, this movie is one of those patches of light. I think, again, despite the harrowing journey that it depicts for you, I think your strength and resolve come through so clearly, and so I want to ask Ramona about that, right? I mean, you've clearly, you were making this film years before, we've reached this particular moment in our history, and I know you've been showing it at film festivals, and I know it's been hitting everywhere. But I know you also now have this partnership with Frontline and the Frontline audience in the United States. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you thought, first of all, that this was an important story to tell originally, and why you think this might be a really important one for Americans to be paying attention to right now.
Yeah, okay, so thanks for having me at this panel. And thanks for amplifying the film. It's really important at this time, as you said. But my interest really in the beginning was Duterte, the rise of Duterte in the Philippines, right? Because I was born and raised in the Philippines. I grew up under martial law. So to see the rise of Duterte from where I sit here in the US was alarming for me. It felt regressive. We were going back to a really dark time of dictatorship, it seemed to me. So that's why I went back to the Philippines. I was drawn back there the end of 2017, really largely to look at the drug war, because that was really the first story out of the Duterte administration. When he came to power, the drug war began. And he did run on that campaign. He ran on a drug war. Law and order, basically, was his thing, which is ironic because then the drug war began, which is all about lawlessness, right? So that's the irony of populism right there. But I got to the Philippines and saw that a lot of people were already covering the drug war. There's been a lot of films, as a matter of fact, about the drug war. So I looked around, and Maria Ressa and Rappler were not only speaking truth to power, questioning impunity, questioning the numbers of bodies, right, of the drug war. But also Maria was connecting that to disinformation and the weaponization of social media. And that was, to me, a very, you pause, you're like, oh my God, this is a story. When you know, okay, something's going on here, this is it. This is what I want to talk about. But of course, it's still very specifically the Philippines. I mean, as you know, storytelling, it has to be very specific in order to get the contours of the story, of the narrative in the film. But so that's how it began. So my interest really was about power, right? And all my films, I look at power and disempowerment. So I got back to the Philippines because I wanted to look at the abuse of power, really. And then after my explorations, all my explorations led me to Maria and press freedom and disinformation, which makes it more global, as you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Echoes and shadows in every corner of the globe, really. And so Richard, actually, I'd like you, if you could, to address this. I mean, I know you study authoritarian regimes all over the world. Can you talk a little bit about the way Maria's case in particular fits with what we know about attacks on human rights defenders all over the world?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. And it's a real honor to be on a panel with Maria and Ramona, who made a wonderful film. And Maria comes across so well in that film, as she is, just so incredibly strong and articulate. So for me, it's a real pleasure to take part in this discussion. So you asked me to contextualize a little bit. And clearly, democracy is under attack, and populist authoritarianism is on the rise. And the Philippines is a really egregious example. I mean, Duterte is quite something. And the example of the violence and the lawlessness of his regime. But we do see the rise of populist authoritarians around the world. Bolsonaro in Brazil, Orban in Hungary, Erdogan in Turkey, and they have similar kinds of platforms. They project this macho, misogynist kind of posture. They attack journalists. They call them enemies of the people, fake news, the kind of things that Donald Trump was doing. And they vilify and create, mythical problems that require violent action. So the caravan, remember, that was coming to the United States of Hondurans at the beginning of Donald Trump's regime that was just going to destroy our society. It suddenly evaporated, but they are very effective in their messaging, and they are gathering a great deal of support from a population to turn it against the democratic process. So 2020 was a really bad year for journalists. 50 were killed worldwide, covering protests, investigating corruption, a large number of them, just as Rappler has done. And 274 were jailed. So the kind of criminalization of investigative journalism that Maria has been experiencing, and the persecution is straight out of the authoritarians' playbook. But something that we've seen that's new is what Maria calls the weaponizing of the internet. And this is about coordinated campaigns online that's part of an onslaught on journalists, on human rights activists, on judges who might stand in the way of the corruption, and to create an atmosphere of intolerance, to create an atmosphere of tolerance for violence, and to facilitate the kind of repression. So we're seeing this around the world, because what Maria represents is accountability. These are corrupt, nepotistic, criminal regimes that engage in lawlessness on a daily basis. And what they fear most is accountability. And that accountability will take many forms. It may just take the form of Pia with a microphone asking the difficult question, but it's so incredibly threatening to them because it calls them out. It pulls aside the veil that they put in front of themselves and shows them to be what they are, which are selfish, narcissist thugs in charge of a very powerful state apparatus. So they go after all of those elements that challenge them: legislators, the courts, independent judiciary, journalists. And so I think we have to see this as part of an international attack on democracy. And there's just a wonderful point in the film, which to me is really the heart of the film. And that's when Maria says, "Why should you care about the Philippines?" And she says, it's because they are testing out these propagandistic, manipulative techniques in countries with weak governments, and then they're porting it into you. So these are laboratories of authoritarianism. And we can see how, with the recent Trump era in the United States, that we're all connected and we're all fighting the same battle to preserve democracy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Richard. And so Maria, actually coming back to you, you do, that is this powerful quote, right, about the interconnection of this in essentially testing ground of authoritarian practices. But I have to imagine you've seen as well in your work and the work of others around you, models of resistance right? The capacity for solidarity, potentially, and those forms of accountability that Richard suggested the authoritarians fear the most. I'm wondering, could you talk about what you found? I know it's hard, and there's no guarantees, and there's no magic bullet. But what are those things that we see? What are those lines of hope that we can also share globally as a way of pushing back against this authoritarian tide?
Thanks for the question. And my God, Richard, what a fantastic summary and contextual. You pulled in every strand of what we're living through. And I think so to answer you, Glenn, it's the problem is global, and frankly, the cause of the problem, the root of it actually, which is, the reason I became a journalist is because information is power. Well, the root of the rise of digital authoritarians, of these kinds of populists globally, Oxford University's Computational Propaganda Research Project says it's in more than 80 countries around the world this year, right? This is the information ecosystem. These are enabled by American companies that, for example, are ruled by Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, right? But there's nothing like that to protect the information ecosystem. I think the core problem, to put it in one sentence, is a phrase by an American biologist, E.O. Wilson. He said that the greatest problem is really Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So think of that in the context of my response to your question, which is that I think for many, many years, so this kind of nostalgia for a father, for an authority, for someone to tell you, for someone to fix things. This really began as an urge in our democracies around 2014. We watched the rise of Modi in India. I covered Joko Widodo in Indonesia, and it was by a very small margin that Joko Widodo won against the son-in-law of former President Suharto, who had been in power for 32 years. But that nostalgia would have just kind of grown very, very slowly. And that nostalgia came from so much infusion of change, too much for our Paleolithic emotions, too much for our brains to handle. And then you add in godlike technology, and all of a sudden we're being manipulated insidiously by our devices, and when that happened, we had no defenses. The kind of machine learning creating a model of us that knows us better than we know ourselves, artificial intelligence pulling it together in a system that Shoshana Zuboff called surveillance capitalism. This is insidiously manipulating all of us, taken and used by leaders like Duterte, Trump, Bolsonaro, Orban, you can name them all. So what does that mean? What we've seen, like in the United States, Democrats had a hard, if you're one of the good guys, you're not going to use a scorched earth policy that throws away all your values. So you have no idea how to deal with that. And we're still seeing that in the Philippines. We have a very, very fragmented opposition. Fringes that tried to use the same kinds of tactics to incite hate, because the reality is, and research has shown us this, that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further on the very same platforms that deliver news. So you can actually say that Facebook, YouTube, that these platforms are biased against facts and biased against journalists. So now I lead to the light. Where is the light? Well, I just hope that we get to a point where your American companies are regulated, that we're protected, that these real-time experiments on mass population, on a mass scale, it's a behavior modification system, and we are Pavlov's dogs, all of us globally. So if that is controlled, then people like me can continue doing our jobs, which with far less risk. But right now, I gotta say, there is a huge cost to standing up to power. And until more people come in, we're we're left alone for a while. I hope that period diminishes, and what will make it diminish is holding the platforms to account as much as holding Duterte to account. In 2016, I said we needed to stop impunity on two fronts: Duterte's drug war and Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, I think that's, I want to talk a little bit more about exactly what platforms like Facebook can do. Richard, I know you've looked into this, and you and some of your students have produced some guidance. Could you talk about what is it that Facebook should be doing, could be doing, might be doing, or are there other best practices that we all can begin pressuring our governments and others to insist upon?
Sure. So they could, in the simplest sense, they could remove the bots and the coordinated campaigns, which Maria was, constantly trolled by. These are automated programs that are coordinated in net centers. They call them different things: troll farms, net centers. They are being used by governments against journalists and against human rights defenders. So every authoritarian government has its own bot operation, and they use their troll armies to attack and threaten, but they also just swamp the space. They flood the space with disinformation and lies and smear and ugly, material that that does have an effect. They could look hard at their artificial intelligence, which curates your feed. And right now, as far as we know, the AI elevates hate speech to the top of your feed. So they have an attention economy. Their business model is to encourage you to look at your phone for as long as possible. They know how to do that because of our Paleolithic emotions, and they feed that with hatred and toxicity. So there are some interesting questions there about how the AI could suppress hate speech, or at least treat it neutrally, but not to elevate it and spread it, which is what it does currently. They could enforce their terms of service in two senses. They have these terms of service, which have very rigorous hate speech guidelines. You're not allowed to, gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, occupational category, not allowed to make, hateful speech on that basis. But they haven't been enforcing it against politicians. But politicians can do the most damage with this speech. And so there was a newsworthy exception for people like Duterte and Trump. Now that has changed just in the last month, but it's very uneven. And they could simply enforce those terms of service in places like the Philippines and Latin America. What we're finding in our research is that material that would be immediately removed in Western Europe and North America, it just keeps going in the Philippines, Nigeria, Guatemala, Colombia, and other places. They just don't look as closely and moderate as actively. So, they've created these policies. Okay, now enforce them. So that would be just a simple start. Then there are other kinds of issues around contextualizing, because they have a universal list of hate speech terms that they create in Palo Alto, and they apply to the whole world. But different countries have different cultural and linguistic practices, and there needs to be some regionalization of slurs, because the terminology that is benign in one place can be very violent in another. And so they need to have some kind of practice or contextualization policy for that. How would they do that? They need experts. They need journalists to help them. They need to work with journalists who are trusted partners. Every one of these companies claims to have trusted partners in every country. Maria should be their trusted partner in the Philippines if she's not already. They need to be getting advice from local partners who could advise them, and they need to listen to this. So what they've created are these imperial structures that look like the structures of the colonial corporation of 200 years ago. And they have yet to decolonize themselves and actually embed themselves in the societies that they are operating in a way that is not devastating for those societies and their polities.
Right. So decolonizing Facebook, that sounds like an important agenda to say the least. And I want to come back though also to something you said, Maria, and this is for Ramona, right? And if we're thinking about the way in which the technologies have become, these kind of primary delivery methods for lies, right? And to do so with incredible speed. I tend to think about documentary film as in some ways exactly the opposite. It takes a long time, and the goal is the truth, right? And it's in some fundamental way. And your film makes a powerful case for the central role of journalism in the democratic enterprise. I wonder if you could talk about how you understand the role of documentary film as a particular genre as part of this overall defense of democracy, because there must be a role there. And you're on mute, Ramona.
Of course, I'm on mute. I'm always on mute. I think documentary films complement what journalism does, what journalists do, right? I always say I'm not a trained journalist. I'm a filmmaker. I went to grad school actually for filmmaking, the filmmaking school was in the arts department. It wasn't in the comms department, actually. We were in the art department. So that tells you a lot. I think what we do is it's a slow burn, right? Documentaries. We film for a long time. It's immersive, at least I do. And we film moments. We give people an experience. So everything that Richard just said, I show you lived experience of that. So it hits you differently. People, I think, we move people differently. So I show you the lived experience of Maria. What does it really mean to be trolled? 90 minutes, 98 messages per hour. What does it mean? How does it affect you? So that's what we show. We show moments of decision-making, right? We show moments of response. How does she respond to a person who's saying, my retirement pay has gone up. So why should I care about the drug war? And how does Maria respond to that? So it's sort of in real time. And I think it gives people the experience of what it is like. And then they can assess that experience and figure it out for themselves. It's really about individual responses to the film and where you stand in this landscape. What are you going to stand for? What are your values? So I'm not too prescriptive when it comes to messages, because I think messages are really, it's a matter of context. It's a matter of your lived experiences. And that's very, very individual. So I think it just unpacks it and moves people in a different way. And that's how I see documentary.
And I think that's right. And I think we talk a lot in our programs about empathy as a critical skill that our students foster through a variety of activities. And film seems to be a particularly powerful mechanism for fostering that empathy.
Yes, and also hopefully it also gets to nuanced storytelling, right? And goes beyond stereotypes and caricatures. So it's important. So in the film, I also feature Duterte's allies, right? Mocha Uson and General Bato. But going beyond that, a caricature, and hopefully understanding them more, but not being an apologist for them. So I'm also very careful. So as a filmmaker, I straddle like not being an apologist for people like Bato and Mocha, and not also doing hagiography about Maria, right? That doesn't also help. So it's somewhere in the middle and unpacking all that and trying to make you see. And the fact that it's, it resonates worldwide, it's because of the lived experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, that most certainly comes through. And I wonder if we can unpack a little more maybe with Maria then. I mean, it's clear, again, the kind of overwhelming sense of you we get from the film, or at least I got from you, is tremendous courage in the face of a kind of relentless assault from all sides. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the source of that courage. And we get a glimpse of your family and your friends and how supportive they are and how powerful that is for you. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about both that specific kind of courage, but then the kind of endurance that it takes to stand up to 4 years of this.
Yeah, and longer, right? Who knows where all of it is going to end? I think the Duterte administration attacked me at a time in my life and in my career when it's like I had already trained for the marathon. This year is my 35th year as a journalist. Almost 20 of those years I spent with CNN as a conflict reporter. I worked in war zones, and I know why I do what I do. And we created Rappler precisely. I mean, I helped create this news organization, right? Because I felt like we needed to do more than just throw stories into a black hole. That news stories build communities of action, that in order to make the world better, we need to these narratives are important. But it's beyond just the factual reporting. They're stories, exactly like what Ramona does with film. I guess when I came under attack, I couldn't react in any other way but the way I have. And I don't really think about it as anything. It's not courageous. I think these labels come after the fact. It's kind of like when you're doing your reps, you just do it because you got to do, 3 reps with 10, a series of 3 with 10 reps each. So I think that's the way I look at it. It's like they came at a time when we knew who we were. We created Rappler, and we knew the business risks that we were taking, but the mission of journalism is the reason we created Rappler. So in some ways you can say that these times actually called us to action. This is why we exist. And so to react in any other way would not be who I am, who we are, but also it's like you just got chosen for the starting 5 in a basketball team. You have the thing of oh my God, now I've really got to perform. Well, that's kind of it. This time matters. And so I guess what looks like courage is really just me every day. And I think about it like this. It's like I'm committed to these values today, and I promise I will work for them tomorrow. It's like that simple. And then tomorrow and tomorrow. And unlike Macbeth, the tomorrows hopefully lead to a good place, So yeah, and it is also purpose, mission. My team is incredible. I can't do anything less. And my task is really to hold up the sky so that my team can do the work. Young Pia, she was 26 years old when Duterte tried to physically intimidate her. It's asymmetric, that kind of power shift, but there she is, very proudly, strongly, respectfully asking questions.
Right, yeah, so we all need to be training those democratic muscles, right? This is, it's a long game. And so, constantly practicing that, I think is key. And talking about your team, obviously, you're at the center of this movie, but it's clear that you're surrounded by, a courageous, committed group, Pia, Patricia Evangelista, and even Ramona, as you said, Mocha Uson in her own way, comes through. And Ramona, I want to ask you, right, even in your previous work, right, on Motherland and in Melda, you have a really powerful exploration of the Filipina experience specifically. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the role women are playing in the ongoing struggle for democracy in the Philippines. Historically, we know a little bit, but even now.
Just look at Rappler, right? Mostly women, mostly young women. And I think the journalists that Rappler attracts they're self-selecting. They're usually that's their first job out of college. think about it. It's like Rambo. Well, not a woman, but he covers the police. That was his first job out of college, and I think he was accused of libel before he even got the job, right, as an intern. But they're incredibly. I don't know where they get it, right? They are so committed, but it's also because of Rappler as an organization. I think they protect the reporters so the reporters could do their jobs. So, for example, when the government was trying to shut down Rappler, they didn't call the reporters in to say, hey, we're being shut down, be kind to whatever judge should cover, nothing. They were protected from all that so they could still do their jobs. And yes, the role of women. It's so interesting because my new documentary is mostly about women, Filipino women again. So I've been thinking about that a lot. But I think the Filipino one, there's something very strong about them in both sides, right? Like Imelda, who's an anti-hero, she also had ideas of being a mother to the nation, right? That was always her thing, being a mother to the nation. On the other hand, when Corazon Aquino became president, right, she goes, it's great. Yeah, I'm mother to, but you can call me the mother of the nation, but I'm running to be president, which is a great line. I'll always remember that. It's great that I'm a mother, but I also want to be president. But it's always been, it's not, people like to say it's a matriarchal society, but it isn't, I don't think. It depends on class, it's very socioeconomic based, but look at the overseas Filipino workers, right? Most of them are women. The women who leave the country to earn a living so they can send money back home. That's mostly women. They're teachers, they're nurses all over the world. It's the women who go out, and it's like they make operational their domesticated skills abroad, like they're nannies abroad, nurses, teachers. It's pretty, and they're mostly women. So the men stay at home and I don't know what they do. They do stuff. They drink. No. I take that back. Not all of them do.
That's all right. We're only sort of recording this. That's.
I know. Okay. Who's here anyway?
Exactly. Yes. You gotta check.
Yeah.
But thank you. Yeah. No. I think that's important, and well, it makes us excited for your next film as well. And so maybe near the end you can give us a preview of what you're working on. But I want to come back to Richard for one more question before I pivot to some of the audience questions. Well, obviously, I don't know about you. I spent some time today watching the impeachment hearings for our own dearly departed Donald Trump, who has, off somewhere moping in Mar-a-Lago, which is, certainly an improvement. But of course, globally, Duterte's still there, Bolsonaro's still there, Modi's still there, Orban's still there. Or most of these figures are still there. So is this an exception, or what in your mind is the prospect for kind of global democracy moving forward? Are there signs could be, maybe like the virus having peaked and moving into an era of some sort of anti-authoritarian vaccination?
I like.
If you're tapping me for optimism, I don't know that I can help you. But look, I think that we had a wave of democratization in the 80s and the 90s. And I remember when Corazon Aquino, when Marcos fell, I remember that distinctly. And it was a world event. Everyone was paying attention to that. And it came at a time when other dictators were falling as well around the world. And there was, from the mid-80s onwards, this wave of democratization. But it coincided with the rise of neoliberal economics and the creation of inequality like we have never seen in human history, at least during the capitalist era. And so if you combine a democratic process with massive material inequality, the democracy is going to suffer. And that's what I thought was good and brave about Ramona's film, is that she showed these average, ordinary people saying, we love Duterte, my pension's gone up, I live in this grinding poverty, democracy hasn't done me any good, so I might as well sign up to the strong man who's gonna kill the drug dealers and put my pension up, and if that happens, I don't care. And that's the bargain that many populations are making around the world. And we can't just dismiss them as deplorables. We have to say there are real problems here. And until we address that massive socioeconomic inequality, the racial injustice, until democracy shows that it can tackle those deep-seated structural issues, people are going to vote with their feet. And they're going to vote for the Bolsonaros and the Orbans. And they're going to blame the immigrants. And they're going to find scapegoats, and they're going to tolerate violence, and a president who says, I will kill you, which is, I just couldn't believe how many times Duterte said that. I mean, it was stunning. So I think it's a long road, and I don't see that the advocates of liberal democracy are yet making a very strong and plausible argument for deep social change. It's starting to happen, but until that happens and there are concrete deliverables, then I think it's in the balance. I wish I could have a more optimistic message, but I think this could go either way.
No, we're here for the truth, Richard. So unwarranted optimism is not what we're after. But I think that's right. I mean, I was struck, even in the film, Ramona, right? Some of the images of the crowd, it looks like Riefenstahl, right? This is Triumph of the Will, right? The kind of overawe of the great leader there. But of course, right? The genuineness of the pain, the anxiety, the disillusionment with institutions that lead people to, this kind of authoritarian path does not, of course, and certainly, Richard, you weren't making this point, diminish the fact that, of course, what happens is the displacement of that anger onto the most vulnerable. And in the film, of course, it's clear that the war on drugs is, about creating these others that become the legitimate targets for the violence and the rage. And so we have a couple of questions here, actually, from audience members about that. We didn't, that's been a major focus of Rappler's coverage, and of course, the film is about Rappler, but less the coverage. But I wonder, Maria, if you can talk about that. We have this question from an audience member, Florraine, who says there is such a big media focus on the key figures, Duterte, former police chief Bato, and the drug war. But how do the efforts of Rappler seek to amplify the voices of those directly targeted, the drug personalities being victimized and murdered, and their right to health? So Maria, can you talk a little bit about some of those voices, and Ramona too, if you want to jump in there. I know that was I'm sure part of the filmmaking experience as well.
The poorest of the poor are the targets of the drug war. It isn't the drug lords. And in fact, I can't think of a drug lord that has been jailed or held accountable for anything except Lila de Lima, who has been charged as a drug lord, but all the evidence in 4 years, this is her 4th year, February 24th in prison, right? So more than 1,000 days, however many days. So the reason why I got targeted, why Rappler was targeted, was because we not only kept track of the number of people getting killed in the drug war, but even as the police rolled them back in plain view, but we also did something we called the impunity series. And those are the stories of the people. We focused on making the numbers real, because the study that says when you just look at numbers, you can excuse genocide if you just look at numbers, and we know this through history. So the impunity series, I put a link in on that. It's funny, everything bad that happens to us comes with a journalism award. That impunity series has won several awards, and we continue to try to do that. But Are people listening, I guess, is the question. And hand in hand with that is President Duterte. You saw this in the film. He says he governs, he rules. His leadership style centers on violence, uh, and so, yeah. Just the last part, picking up from what Richard said, I think that, this is, yes, it's a perfect storm of both economics and, the kind of failure, the trickle down effect didn't work. But you gotta also, I think you have to kind of look behind that, because in a way, Americans just dodged a bullet right now. And the real heavy lifting is still coming. Yes, okay, guys, you voted, but look at how divided 70 some odd million Americans believed the meta narrative of stealing the vote. So, how did that happen? Again, that's a manipulation that over time, first you have to stop. And then, how do you, like the drug war, rehabilitate when people can't believe the facts? And then, as they believe these conspiracy theories seeded a year earlier on RT, amplified by Steve Bannon on YouTube, and seeded in closed Facebook groups. And then QAnon comes down October of 2020. And then, of course, President Trump himself. So it's the same methodology: bottom up, exponentialized, top down, cementing it, and then people manipulated. So it isn't just the economics, it's the fact that we are living in a matrix, and we are being manipulated. So that's the first step. Otherwise, we have no free will.
Yes. Yeah.
Ari. Yeah.
Is again a challenge, but one done, I think, in conversations like this, right, and the ability to dissect. And in thinking about the drug war, I'm reminded that actually here in Connecticut, just this past week, we announced the closure of the maximum security prison, Northern CI, which is a testament to the way in which the drug war was used in this country, in a similar fashion, to expand a police state, highly racialized, targeting communities of color and the poor communities. So these are not new tricks in anyone's book, and they manifest themselves differently. They work, which is why they're employed.
But Glenn, the difference, I think, between the drug war, the way Americans hear it, and the drug war, the way we live it in the Philippines, is that, if you look at the human rights group, our Commission on Human Rights says at least 27,000 people have been killed since December last year. So yes, they mean different things to us, but this kind of the violence that we are living through that is now normalized is, I've never seen anything like it in the 35 years I've been a journalist.
Yeah, and Duterte said, right? I mean, the bodies, Pasig River, which is the main river through that goes through the city, will be filled with bodies, and the fish will be so happy because they'll be feasting on these bodies. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's Duterte promised he was going to do this. He promised. This is what he ran on. But he also, he uses the language of the streets, right? It's street justice. Like Patricia Evangelista says in the film, it's not only that I'll make your life better, I'll revenge. It's revenge. I'm going to get our common enemies, which are the elite and media. I'm going to revenge whatever they've done to you. I'm going to get them. And I'm going to get the drug users and well, it doesn't happen to be the drug lords. They're low-level drug users and drug pushers. But that's what they use. And I think people respond to that. So when you see them laughing at the rallies, there's a bit of a nervous laughter, of course, right? Hey, he's talking about killing, but it resonates with them because he's one with them, right? He's painted himself as an outsider. He's an outsider outside the capital, the political elite of the capital, but he had been mayor of Davao for years. So he's a politician himself. But they believed him. They believed this language of the streets, okay. He's going to revenge whatever ills have befallen me. They believe it.
It's a strange contradiction how people who can be so powerful and violent can feel themselves to be the victims who now exercise legitimate revenge on others. It's a remarkable psychological paradox, but I think we see a continuity between all of these populist leaders. They all see themselves as the outsider victim who is going to exert their revenge upon the elites who have mocked the average people. I appreciate Maria not correcting me, but qualifying what I was saying about the economic piece, because that was one thing that we're really learning about the pro-Trump crowd in the US, and particularly the people storming the Capitol. These were not the poorest of the poor. These were not the deeply marginalized. And in fact, individuals, at least in the 2016 elections, earning under $50,000 did not vote for Trump in the majority. It's really that $75,000 to $125,000 a year income. It's like this middle tier. And so it was remarkable to see in the individuals storming the Capitol, many firemen, policemen, civil servants, accountants. And so there is a subjective piece that is independent of the material piece, that there's this idea of violent collective revenge on the establishment, which has taken hold. And it's done that through social media. That has happened through the weaponizing of the internet that's described in the film. And that's independent of, crushing, grinding poverty in the streets of Manila.
So let me ask a question from a student to both Maria and Ramona. So this is from Ryan Quigley, and he congratulates both of you on an unforgettable film. He's a digital media and design student, one of Heather's students, and he's curious about how you two connected and how the filming process went, given how turbulent the events were in Maria's life as it was happening, and up to and including a kind of life-threatening situation. So it sounds like he wants to hear a little bit more about your relationship, through the film.
The origin story. I call it the origin story. Well, I almost met Maria in 2004, because in 2004 I released my very first film, Imelda. You mentioned Imelda, my first film about Imelda Marcos, the former First Lady of the Philippines. I was in Manila because she was suing us. She had a temporary restraining order in the film because I had invaded her privacy and sullied her good name. So I was summoned to Manila by my distributors to show up in court to defend the film. I arrived in Manila, and the distributors gave me a list of press people who wanted to talk to me. And Maria was on that list, and she was then working for CNN. She was actually the face of CNN in Southeast Asia. So when I saw her name, I'm like, oh my God, Maria Ressa wants to talk to CNN, yes. And then someone whispered in my ear, well, she doesn't really like the film. She has issues with the film. I'm like, oh, I don't want to talk to her. I was just so beleaguered. I'm like, I can talk about the litigation, but I don't want to litigate my film, right? I've done that already all year. Can I pass? And they said, no, you don't pass with Maria. You just don't. I'm like, no, I am. And just tell her something. So I didn't do it. So 14 years later, fast forward, I'm in her office at Rappler pitching her this film. You're going to be the center for my film. I want to follow you for a whole year and a half and all this, thinking, oh my God, she's never going to remember that I turned her down. Of course, the first thing out of her mouth is like, I always wondered why you turned me down all those years ago for an interview. She remembered. And so it was this moment where I'm like, should I pretend to forget? And I said, no, I'm not. I'm just gonna, come clean. I'm like, yeah, it was early in my career. I just didn't want to talk about the film. And so that was the start. And I think transparency is really key. I was very honest that I was also covering Duterte's allies. And so with Mocha and Bato also knew I was covering Maria. I wanted to cover everyone. And that was the start. I mean, it's a process. Access is a process. If I told Maria what I really needed was that I needed to be in a hotel room with you and your sister while she would never say yes, right? So process is, it's a process of, it's trust. She needed to trust me, and that doesn't come, overnight. We followed her for a year and a half immersively, and that just comes with organically, and you just have to be transparent every step of the way. And
but I did know what she needed, because I've done something like that. So I knew that's where it was, but there are hurdles, right? And she passed the first one by being honest. So I think it's George Shultz just died. And one of the last things he did was he mentioned, that with trust, everything is possible. And without trust, nothing is possible. And that is both this film, right? So this film, and actually, frankly, all human endeavor. And that is what, that's what social media has taken away, right? So trust. Anyway, so with Ramona, it was really 3 reasons. That, I knew her work. The second is she's Filipino-American. And the third, which is quite practical, I wanted documentation of what we were going through because I felt this is different, very, very different. And we couldn't do it ourselves. We didn't have the resources. I prefer using our resources to tell the stories of people who are getting killed, right? I wouldn't want to just keep a camera with us. So Ramona on all 3 fronts. And then in the process, we became friends, and that debate that started with Imelda is a debate about, where is the line that you draw when it's the moral line, right? So I've covered lots of people, villains and heroes. And there's just, with the villains, at some point, you actually point out their villains because we have to do it in a 2.5 or a minute 30 story immediately. So I make those decisions faster. Ramona lives her way into that. But, the basic question is silence is complicity when evil is being done.
Well, that and objectivity, right? We went on and on about objectivity and found, though, it's really not objective at all. So, and I don't pretend to be, objective, so.
Right, yes. Well, objectivity and truth are not the same thing. And
exactly.
My point of view is absolutely necessary for that. And I think, we have a whole slew of questions, and I want to get to them that are focused on what people can do. People are really eager. I think you've made clear to them, the scope and scale of the challenge we face. And so I want to ask a few of those. We have one from someone who's actually thinking about the circumstances in India right now and what's happening. A colleague of ours, Sahil Lal, and he says currently what has been deemed the largest protest in modern history, the farmers' protest, is occurring in India. Since the protest began, the Indian government has been unlawfully abducting, torturing, and sexually assaulting activists, protesters, and journalists, including Nodeep Kaur. What can we do, and what tools can we use as a global community to fight the censorship and protect free press, especially when it is being perpetrated by the government of the world's most populous democracy? So, this one seems to be focused on in moments of crisis, right? And this was the big selling point originally of social media platforms, right? It gave us all access to this information and an opportunity to intervene. Do you see opportunities? How can we, in moments of crisis, show solidarity with those around the globe who are facing this kind of scale of repression?
So I guess I go back to the social media platforms, right? This is now Putin's fire hose of falsehood. So if you're not living in India, that's the first step. And I would say India was ahead of us, ahead of the Philippines in terms of all sides began using Twitter to actually just pump out anger and hate. And this became problematic. And of course, with the Modi administration, with the way they've used it, there have been tons of stories done on this now with at the Wall Street Journal taking the lead in many of them. How do you do this? I think demand that better governance, that people are protected on social media because it is global in scope. So if that first problem is addressed, then the human rights activists, the journalists can actually do their jobs. How else? Support them. Like if news organizations, for example, are getting, there's a double whammy of our business model crumbled, advertising has moved to the platforms. This is a time period, again, where the news organizations in India, in the Philippines, in any of these countries, they will need support through this time period. Lend your voice, come out of social media also. But the hard part is, even as it's a fire hose of falsehood, even as it's chaotic on social media, the governments also still care about it. So how does it move beyond social media to real civic action? I don't have a magic bullet here. This is something that we're really truly trying to solve in the Philippines.
Richard, Ramona, do you have no silver bullets, but thoughts?
I'm sorry, what was the question again? I was reading the chat. It's really
no, that's okay. I know it's busy over there right now.
I know it is. It's great.
About taking action in support of folks around the world facing repressive crackdowns, whether that's in India, in Russia, right? What are the tools in our tool chest that might make this possible?
Oof. I don't know if this is answering your question. I just saw a short about the Hong Kong protests, and they were all footage generated by the protesters on the ground, and they went live on Facebook, right? And everyone started just gathering that footage and making it into this amazing film of really inside the protests. It's like you're immersed, running with them in it is just so amazing. So I think support those kinds of works of films, show them, spread them, because there's nothing like feeling that, me, I'm all about experience, right? That's why I make films. Feeling the protest, like you can smell the protests in Hong Kong. It's pretty incredible. So me, it's about that, like showing work and understanding. And it's also about personal responsibility, right? If you know something, if an article hits you in the gut, makes you angry, don't share it. Don't share it first. Stop, think, and then look at the sources. Are they legit or not, right? I think while the social media platforms figure out legislation or whatever, or changing algorithms and the engineering of the social media platforms, we as individuals can do something. Now that we know that this is happening to us, we need to do something ourselves, right? I don't know if that answered your question, but that was what I was.
It's a start, but I know Maria, you've got a staff meeting that you've got to run to. I just want to take 1 second. We're going to stay on a little longer with Ramona and Richard, but I know you've got to run. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was an honor and a pleasure, and we're grateful for your work. So please extend our gratitude to your staff as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and see you around. Bye-bye.
Bye, Maria.
Thank you.
All right. So kind of good social media personal practice. That was another question in the from the audience. Like, should I just unplug completely, or are there ways in which...
I'm not. Yeah, I have unplugged, sorta. I mean, I'm the only reason I'm on social is because I had to push the film. And it's a very effective way to get audiences to see the film. So I stayed on Twitter, I stayed on all the social, but now I feel like, but I'm not really on it. I can truly unplug, because to me, Facebook stresses me out, so I can actually try it for a day. It's great, actually.
Yeah, I would recommend social media free periods in your day and week. Yeah. And to ration it. I went off Facebook because I just, the more I learned about how they collected data and what they did with that data. So I dropped Facebook altogether, and I haven't missed it at all. I stay on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, people. And because I do actually learn things. And when there's breaking news, it's a good place to find out some things that are going on, but it is toxic and it is ugly. And so I would just mention 3 things. Committee to Protect Journalists is a really good organization. and you can support them and get involved in some of the things they're doing. CPJ, they're very good. There are a couple of movements online that you can join. One is #ChangeTheTerms. And these are a group who are, you can see also their website, Change the Terms. And you can see that they are pressuring social media companies to more aggressively regulate hate speech online. And the other movement is called I Am Here, #IamHere. And it's a group of people, it started in Sweden, spread to Germany, and now there are many hundreds of thousands of them around the world. And all they do is confront people politely and firmly online who are using toxic, racist, ugly speech. And they say things like, do you really have to use, those kinds of words? Do you really have to respond in that way? And they claim that when confronted in this way, that 70% of the individuals take their post down. So they engage in sort of janitorial services for the internet. And they claim a certain amount of success in doing so. It's called Jag är här in Swedish, I am here. And it's simply just responsible individuals, and they don't confront people aggressively. They just ask them, do you have to respond like that? Why don't you think about the language you're using? And they claim that, again, this isn't the magic bullet. It may not change the world, but it's an effort of civil society to change discourse and public discourse, because we are facing such enormous problems worldwide. There's no way we're going to resolve them if we're screaming abuse at each other in 288 characters.
Right. And certainly there's no one way, right? It's a cultural shift and requires a wide range of tactics to address. Maria's left us, but and maybe it's for the best because we're about to talk about her. A number of people want to know how they can specifically support her and Rappler in this particular kind of moment. So maybe Ramona, you can you can act as a bit of a proxy. One of our supporters, Vic Schachter, asks, how can we in the U.S. or individuals as a group meaningfully support Maria and Rappler's efforts? Another individual, Carl Ronaldo, himself Filipino American, asks, how overseas Filipinos can help defend democracy in the Philippines, especially when they don't share the lived experiences of their families there. What are the specific ways in which we can lend our support, both moral and otherwise, to Maria and the team?
So I'm going to start with very practical support for Rappler, because they do have crowdfunding online. I think if you just Google Rappler crowdfunding, you'll find it. So that's a very practical way. They also have like a membership series called Rappler Plus that you can become a member of. And there they really they do deep dives into the situation, mostly in the Philippines, but also overseas. Lately, they were discussing, Myanmar, what's happening in Myanmar. And they have, Maria has guests come, and Rappler Plus members are invited to come and engage in a space where it's, it's membership only. So it's a very, civil discussion. So those are two ways. And also but Rappler is only one of many independent news groups in the Philippines. So I think to support them as well, because independent media has to survive in the Philippines, or it's democracy is dead. So that to begin, because they have a lot of on behalf of Maria now, they have a lot of, you can imagine she has like 10 legal cases, right? imagine all the legal costs. So they do have an active crowdfunding campaign online. And that it's really helpful.
Wonderful. Yes. And I noticed in the chat, our folks behind the scenes have been putting in those links to those. So, so do check those out. Richard, again, whether you know Maria specific says, I know you know many human rights defenders around the world, and can you offer advice for how folks watching this might be able to contribute to, protecting them in some modest way?
Sure. Yeah, it's a really tough time for journalists, for human rights defenders worldwide, and for a variety of reasons. One of which has been the last 4 years of the Trump administration not supporting democracy through the US State Department and our embassies taking a who cares about human rights approach to local politics. So individual governments felt like there was no, even though the US has done this in a capricious, hypocritical way, it still mattered that the United States and other countries took a strong position on human rights in international agencies and in countries around the world. So it has been a tough time for individuals who care about democracy and about investigative journalism, and I think get involved with various organizations. It could be specifically on an issue that you really care about, or it could be some of the umbrella organizations like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty, and they always need volunteers, they always need money, they always need activity on the part of local chapters. So, I would recommend getting involved and mobilizing at whatever level you find most immediately accessible and satisfying. So I think there are a variety of ways in which I think it's interesting how, human rights has slightly gone off the boil in terms of our national discourse. And that may not be a bad thing, because it could give human rights activists more of an opportunity to reinvent it and to re-energize it. And so if you have ideas about what human rights ought to be and what kind of campaigns they ought to be engaging in, and of course, human rights in the US have always been for other people, and the project of incorporating a human rights campaign into the United States on the issues that we face around, name your issue, health, housing, education, racial justice, has been a work in progress. And so one can campaign using the language and framework of human rights in the United States as well. And that's equally legitimate and important activity. And that's something we do at UConn, by the way, just to point that out.
Yes, thank you for the naked plug. Absolutely. And I'm go ahead.
I just thought of one more. There's a coalition, the Hold the Line Coalition, and I think that CPJ, RSF, Reporters Without Borders, Reportiers Sans Frontières, and ICFJ have come together to support Maria, actually, and it's called Hold the Line. So if you Google Hold the Line Coalition, you'll come to their page, and that's one way to support Maria as well and her work.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'll add one more item that I think folks can do to help, and that is to share this film. It is a powerful story. Again, that not only highlights the specific courage and challenge that Maria and Rappler faced, but clearly gets at the heart of the fundamental challenge all democracies are facing right now. And it is available to stream on Frontline. So if you watched it already, watch it again, share it with your friends and family. We're close to the end of our program.
I just want to plug public media because it's important. I mean, you can really actually, because of public media, you can actually watch a film for free. You don't have to subscribe to Netflix or Hulu or Amazon. It's actually available for free in North America. And that is because of public media, which is also important. And we should also support it. So there, I got it in, the Frontline.
Great. Well, everybody's getting their plugs in, including Frontline. We are delighted to be partnering with them. You know, this year's film series, this is a kind of special piece of it. This year's film series is all focused on UConn faculty filmmakers, but we made an exception because Frontline is definitely part of the UConn family. This is our 4th Frontline film that we've screened. Powerful, powerful human rights work. So we're delighted to do it. We're coming close to the final minutes of our 90. I do want to give both of you a chance to leave us with some final thoughts before I close. We covered a wide range of things, so you may have already said everything you'd like to say, which is fine too. But if there's anything we've left out, anything that you wanted to make sure we leave folks with, now's your opportunity. Richard, I'll start with you.
No, I mean, I think I would just end on, you know, the banal but important observation that we're all connected and that there's been this process of globalization that has really taken off since the financial deregulation of the late 80s. And our supply chains, our politics, our internet, our social media is all connected. And the struggle of Maria and the Philippines for democracy and for accountability and for truth is one that we're all facing. And I would end with just a point about American exceptionalism was always a myth. And it's even truer now, the mythical nature of American exceptionalism. So the degree to which we understand ourselves as part of the world and part of the same kinds of processes that are shaping politics and culture and society in the Philippines, and recognizing the degree to which our struggles are interconnected and rely upon one another, I think we will be stronger in our efforts to build and sustain democracy and create societies that are not, you know, deeply embroiled in the violent politics that we see in the Duterte regime, and that we've seen paroxysms of, although at a much less intense level in the Trump regime and in other populist regimes. But this is serious business, and our fates are interconnected.
Thank you, Richard. Ramona.
Wow, hard to follow that. So I think one thing I learned about, like after making this film, is how fragile democracy is, right? How fragile institutions are. Like I told you, I grew up under martial law, and we threw the dictator out in '86. So it took all that time to build institutions, and here comes Duterte, right? In like 6 months, a year, those institutions were like really basically gone. So we actually streamed this film in the Philippines for 24 hours right before Maria's verdict in the Philippines last June, just to raise awareness that her verdict was going to be handed down that Monday. So we streamed it for free. And through Frontline. And Frontline told me, you know, don't expect a big audience. We typically get 20 to 40,000, but we're doing this so quickly that we don't really have time to push it out. Maybe expect 5,000 people. I'm like, oh, that's a lot. That's 5,000 more people, right? That will know about Maria's verdict. 233,000 full views in 24 hours. And I got so much feedback that weekend, but the feedback was not anger, yes, there was anger, but there was disappointment in themselves, right? For taking their eyes off the ball, because we had already fought this fight back in '86, and now we're fighting it again. And there was this sort of really malaise and disappointment, and how did we get to this point, which really struck me. And oh my God, it's such a depressing weekend. So don't take your eyes off the ball, you know, don't take anything for granted. I really learned that weekend. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. I think that's a beautiful place to leave it, right? Don't take your eye off the ball, and don't take anything for granted. I don't think currently we're in danger of that, but we quickly forget, and so it's important to remind ourselves. I want to thank you both, Ramona and Richard, and of course we thank Maria out there, who is, you know, committed to her work. She's back at a staff meeting, working on the next editions of Rappler. And I want to thank Heather Elliott Falmolaro for her opening and welcoming, and my colleague Kathy Lieball, the director of the Human Rights Institute, with whom we organize this film series on an ongoing basis. Erica Howard of Frontline, who has been a terrific partner with us over the years, and we're excited for more years of that. Rachel Jackson, Julie Mellon, Elnara Klicheva, and Nana Amos for their support behind the scenes. And thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope you'll join us again soon for our additional human rights film series. We put the link to the human rights film series in the chat, so check out those dates. Come back, join us for more great works of film and video, and more great conversations. And with that, we'll call it an evening. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.